The world is currently a more difficult and confusing place that it's ever been, and navigating it's difficult. But the one fundamental that you absolutely need, if you're going to get through it, and if you're going to negotiate this world, is understanding something about yourself as a human being, and this is it: you're stupid. Your brain is stupid. Um, when you grow up, everybody is taught how amazing the human brain is, and that is because we are comparing it with frogs and birds and ants, and rather than trying to compare it with what it could be. And the simple fact is, it's a bunch of fleshy nonsense that's evolved over hundreds, well, in fact, sorry, not just hundreds, thousands of years, because it's a mammalian brain, so millions and millions of years, because before it was a mammalian brain, it was something else. Or alternatively, was created by God 6,000 years ago to fuck with you. And make your life difficult and confusing. One of those two things has to be true, because the human brain doesn't handle information well. And the examples are all around us all the time. The most disturbing example of how a human brain works, not example, using the wrong term, system on which the brain works, is that it it gives credence to things that you hear more often, um, rather than credence to things that have more evidence behind it, or are just more obviously true. So if you hear something often enough, you will eventually just assume that it is true. Um, And this is a deeply, deeply disturbing aspect of the human brain. The human brain doesn't record where you heard from something, it doesn't record whether that source was a good source. It records the information, and then every single time you hear the information afterwards, it goes down to that little section of your brain which connected itself together to store it, and it writes over it in heavier ink or heavier crayon. And it just keeps on going over it time and time and time again. And we started learning this, from what I can gather, somewhere around about the 70s. At least politics started learning this somewhere around the 70s. In the 70s, there were still limited ways to get at people, and there were, I don't know, perhaps people around with a little bit more conscience here or there. So it was still possible to get good information, but these days, no. You will see news channels, especially in the United States, spouting exactly the same talking points. Um, and there is a specific message that the people who own your media in your country want to get out. They very often are talking to exactly the same PR companies, and those messages are pummeled and pummeled and pummeled until they enter your brain. And it doesn't matter how smart you are, if you are looking at a different thing while you are being hammered with this information, it will go into your brain and it will get stored as true. It's that simple. It's how you get very, very clever people believing really outlandish things. It happens all the time. Very, very clever people are usually specialists in a certain subject. They usually focus on that subject, and then what will happen is little brainworms will get into their head, little idea brainworms, and they will establish themselves. And there's very little you can do about it, except cut yourself off from sources that are entirely unreliable. Something that's almost impossible to do in the modern world. Um, and if you can't do that, then you have to pay attention to almost everything you're putting into your brain. You are currently better off watching fiction and then carefully chosen documentaries than you are watching modern day news. Modern day news is corrupt. It it might not be the fake news that Donald Trump was screaming from the rooftops, but it certainly just avoids subjects, decides that they're not worth talking about, whether it's the corruption of a certain politician over another one, or they might just pick up on a certain point and decide that it sells newspaper. It doesn't have to be some horrible conspiracy. This will sell newspapers. They don't have to worry about whether it's true or not because they're quoting people, and as long as people completely continue to say exactly the same thing, they can continue reporting it. I just watched an election recently in the United Kingdom where a man who looked ostensibly like a nice man, who had spent his entire life as an activist, fighting for the rights of minorities, was accused daily of being an anti Semite. He managed to be accused of being an anti Semite on at least two occasions that I saw where was meeting with Jewish groups. They weren't the Jewish groups that were mega powerful, but they were Jewish groups, uh, and for that he got called an anti-Semite in the newspapers, and because it was in the newspapers, it got into broadcast TV, and they pummeled it and pummeled it and pummeled it, and he lost an election largely because people, by the end of it, believed that, well, if I'm hearing it so often, it must be true. So the number one thing your brain is stupid about is if it hears something often enough, it will assume it is true. Part of it is also to do with trust in society, that the idea that, well, somebody would have stopped this, somebody would have said something. Um, and in the modern era, that isn't true either. Somebody isn't saying something. Everybody's just worried about hanging on to their jobs. Um, Other examples of human beings' brains working badly, one of my favorites, is our inability to deal with numbers properly, numbers and valuing our time. It's one of the most important things that is needed in a consumer society where you are expected to buy complete tat all the time with hard earned money. If you don't have hard earned money, if you've got easy earned money, then you should be buying all the tat you want. But if you've got hard earned money, you certainly shouldn't be buying tat. Now, one of the ways they get you on this is the human brain is designed to deal with percentages and not very good at dealing with numbers. So a beautiful study that was done, and I'm going to recommend a book at the end of this, which has a lot of these kinds of things in it. A study was done where they checked people and they asked them for on $100 toaster whether they would travel 4 kilometers across town to save $10 on $100 toaster, and people said yes, absolutely, they would. So let's say it was, I don't remember the exact figures, 44% of people said yes, absolutely, they would drive 4 kilometers to save $10. Bearing in mind they calculated in the cost of the driving and everything into it, you still save $10. They took people from exactly the same socioeconomic group and gave them a separate question. And that question was, would you drive across town 4 or 5 kilometers to pick up a $1,000 TV versus getting one right next to you if you could save $10? And people answered no. So that was only a 1% saving versus a 10% saving on the toaster. So human beings did the calculation. They went, no, that's not a good saving. That's 1%. Why would I spend all that time? But that's not the calculation. The calculation is $10. Is $10 worth 4 or 5 kilometer trip? Human beings can't do that calculation naturally. You have to be actively thinking about it in order to do it, which is why on small items, they will very often big up the percentage. And on large items that you're buying, expensive items, they will tell you the amount, if the percentage doesn't look impressive, that you're going to be able to save if you get across town. Just so you know, this all ties back into economics because Um, Economics is all about human beings acting as rational creatures. And all of our economic models, which we are currently trying to work on, which fail us horribly all the time, are based on this idea that we are capable of being rational creatures that make rational decisions. And the simple truth of it is, you have a sludgy brain because you're a human being. It's not a very clever thing. And so you will make bad decisions unless you're absolutely focused on your choice and thinking clearly about it. And quite frankly, we're lucky if we spend 20 minutes a day seriously doing that about our personal lives. The amount of concentration time we have usually goes into our jobs, and our focus time, in order that we either get promoted or just simply don't get fired, depending on how well you're doing in your job. So when it comes to our personal lives, we're tired and we just want to go, I'll take that thing. And that means that you are making horrible choices all the time, whether it is your personal life or whether it is financial decisions. And you are not, when it comes down to these things, a rational creature. And therefore, the economic models that we are currently working on are all big piles of shit. The book that you should be trying, let me see if I can see it on my shelf. I think I've lent it out, is called Cluj. I'll guess on this one I'll have to put up some sort of graphic because I can't remember who wrote it. I probably should have researched that before I started talking to this camera thing. But yeah, hey, I didn't. Go figure. I haven't read it in a little while. Don't know where I put it. So yeah, I'll look it up and I'll put the cover up, and you'll be able to see who wrote it. And I highly recommend it as a book. And no, this is not a paid promotion, because I don't think at this point anybody watches this channel, so nobody would be paying me to promote their goods whatsoever. So yeah, Cluj. That's the book. Graphic up now. Who does that?